Hey there. So today we will look into the topic of Rife machines. I wanted to discuss how they work, where they come from, the history behind them, and whether they are a real therapeutic device or just a scam. The reason I wanted to look into it is because this topic comes up quite frequently on alternative medicine forums, and there doesn't seem to be a good source of information for the people who want to learn more about the machines besides the websites that sell them. There isn't many videos that discuss actual science behind those machines and how the people who sell them and inventors claim how they work. So first, let's look at the history of those machines. So they were invented in the 1900s by a scientist called Royal Raymond Rife. He wasn't a doctor or a biologist or anything like that. He was an engineer that built basically optics and microscopes and things like that. This is an example of one of the microscopes that he built, and his goal was to basically explore microorganisms. He wanted to study viruses, bacteria, and individual cells that he claimed he could see through his machines. As a note, it is possible to see microorganisms with a microscope, and he could have very well developed one to do that. But he was ahead of his time, and no one could really replicate his observations, which were the following. He claimed that when he looked at microorganisms, the bacteria, viruses, and cells that he saw, so he claimed that each of those types of pathogens, especially the harmful ones, that they somehow possess an ability to emit a particular frequency, but more importantly that he somehow was able to measure this frequency using a microscope. And he did that by observing various colors that those microorganisms emitted. And to be clear, it wasn't just him, there are other scientists involved in that. But he's the one who invented the machines and led the theory. So, for example, he claimed that different type of microbes emitted different distinctive colors of light. And this light allowed him to study and look at those microorganisms without using any particular stainings that are currently used to distinguish between different bacteria and expose their structures. And of course he made a bunch of some other claims that we will not go into, like that certain bacteria change size and form based on some factors which could not be replicated, but that's a bit irrelevant. What's important is that based on those frequencies and vibrations that microorganisms emitted, Rife said that he invented a device that was able to measure moral oscillatory rate for different pathogens, and he could use this machine to not only measure the mortal oscillatory rate, but also match it or send an opposite wave or whatever that would destroy the microorganism, just like matching a certain frequency would destroy a glass. And this is basically what forms the foundation of the theory, is that various microorganisms have their own mortal oscillatory rate, which can be matched in order to destroy those pathogens. So in a sense, it is like a resonance of sound waves. So sometimes those machines are called bi-resonance machines. Some claim to send an opposite wave, like sound cancelling headphones. Some claim to work like Rife is claiming to work like this, where if you hit a tuning fork and another tuning fork has the same resonant structure, then it would resonate and shake, and this would eventually break it like a glass breaks when you produce a specific frequency of a sound. Furthermore, there exists a list of frequencies that are published on the websites that sell those machines, and those frequencies correspond to treating a particular disease or even, as you can see here, a particular organ. So I assume that the theory is that different organs also emit a particular frequency that can be measured and then somehow counteracted. So now I want to look into the actual science of what is claimed by Rife and currently what is claimed by various companies that build upon his science. First of all, measuring the waves. So while it is true that cells and bacteria are composed of a specific composition of atoms and molecules and proteins and more complex 3D structure, the issue is that they are so complicated. There's so much that goes into a bacteria or a human cell or even a virus that it's almost impossible for them to produce a stable frequency. In addition, those cells constantly produce something. They produce proteins, they excrete waste, they grow, they divide, they die, they move, which is very different from a much more structured material, that glass, which can indeed react to a very particular frequency. In a cell, there is a lot of stuff that goes on. This is a more realistic picture of a normal cell, which includes a lot of different proteins and a lot of different structures, and they're all very different. Even if you isolate one structure from there and remove everything else, then it could be possible, to measure or find its resonant frequency. But in a state that it is in, how would you do that? Plus, they share a lot of the common structures with any other beneficial bacteria in the body or any other normal cell type that's not cancerous or is not sick with the virus. They all have genetic material, they all have amino acids, they all have water molecules. So it's almost impossible to measure a particular frequency of the cell. On top of that, those cells would be located very deep in the tissue. They are not on the surface or on a table or isolated from the whole body. They're inside of it, which brings me on to the next point, destroying those cells. So first, even if we could measure the frequency of the bacteria, which, as I just tried to explain, is almost impossible because they are composed of probably millions of different molecules and share a lot of similarities with other cell types. The next challenge is destroying those cells, because the idea, as we've seen behind those Rife machines, is producing a frequency that is safe for a device to use, which means that it cannot harm or destroy any human tissue at the exposure levels that those machines are claiming to produce. So even if you've identified the frequency of the, let's say, pathogenic bacteria, and then you made a machine that produces this frequency to resonate with the frequency of the pathogen. This is done with this machine, which has a transmitter in the form of an electrode, or if you want to do it remotely, there is a plasma tube that produces the same frequency but from a distance, so you don't have to hold on to it. When those frequencies are produced, as I mentioned, there is a lot of other structures within the human body. Even if we isolate the human body and take the site where the pathogenic bacteria are located, just the volume and quantity of various molecules, water molecules, tissues, muscles, anything, a lot of it. There's so much of it that they would dampen any vibrations that transmitted into the human body via this Rife machine. So even if they could reach the pathogenic bacteria with those frequencies, when those bacteria and viruses start to vibrate, all of this energy will be instantly dissipated. And this is the same principle that works with tuning forks. If you hit one and then you put your hand on top of it, it will just stop vibrating because all this tissue will absorb the vibration. Why would it be any different with bacteria that are located inside of your body? It's like taking a tuning fork, swallowing it, and then producing a frequency on the machine that would try to resonate with this tuning fork that you've swallowed. But since you've swallowed it, there would be no resonance produced because there is just too much tissue that dampens the vibrations. Which brings us to the next topic of what actually goes into the machines. This is a Spooky 2 device, which is sold on their website from £300 going up to £3,000. Is there a difference between all of these machines? They claim that there's different power involved, there are different methods by which they work. Some you have to hold, others you can put on your ankles, and finally there are the plasma tubes that don't require for you to even touch them. Looking, being objective and looking at their resources, which would be included with any medical device that costs that much, all we can find is a lot of very complicated software instructions. This page has 244 pages. So somehow they expect a user to read all of their lessons in the guide, So it's kind of like one of those online courses where they teach you to trade. And they have different sections. They have even sections to eradicate pests. There are different protocols. There's a lot of information, but this is all software based. They explain components of the machine, but they don't really explain how those components actually function. Just explain on how to connect them, how to launch their software, which is also very complicated, and it's just a bunch of configurations and frequencies and instructions on how to follow them. It's 244 pages that people are expected to read and take their information from. The only thing that I could find is, for example, when you look at the generator, all of those are how to use. They don't actually explain how they work. But if you press on working theory of the generator, then you get a YouTube video where a guy just says a bunch of nonsense without any diagrams, any papers, any research whatsoever. He just talks. He just explains about how electrical signals convert into frequencies and whatnot. And the actual reason I picked up this topic is because specifically on Reddit, there is a lot of posts that talk about Rife machines, their chronic Lyme groups, which are people who have a chronic form of a Lyme disease and they're out of treatments. They don't know what to do, they're lost. They tried doctors which told them that there is nothing they can do. They tried self-treatments at home, they tried supplements, and finally they found some information of Rife machines, and they go on Reddit because there isn't much information online that explains how Rife machines work. From third-party sources of information, as we just saw on individual websites, but there isn't actually much information from a doctor or researcher or an engineer that would look into this and deep dive into the topic. So, and as an example, it's not a known thing or a scam. So, for example, we can see where a guy here says that where a family member was scammed by a Rife machine producer into purchasing the machine and using it. And all the comments that say that this machine is real, that they had their family members that used it and it helped them. Other people say, do your research, look into it, there is actually science that goes into it. And those don't seem to be paid comments. It just seems that people really believe it and don't completely understand how those machines work. They claim that you can't find evidence to debunk the machine. They say that the learning curve is quite steep. So, the learning curve of 244 pages of just one document on their website that apparently you need to study in order for the machine to work. And I can see this pattern repeat over many posts. So even if we scroll down and find a post that has a different subreddit of scabies group where a person shares their experience and again mentions that the machine works, he bought one, and the issue is that the machine works, but either you don't have the correct technology to use it or you haven't researched it enough in order for the machine to work. So people just try and at some point it starts working and they claim that they have finally studied it deeply enough, without any degrees of course, just following the guides of the manufacturers, and finally the machine starts to work. And of course it doesn't stop at scabies or Lyme. People use it for everything: UTIs, liver conditions, cancers, cold, flu, COVID, anything. And I think a part of the problem is that there are machines that are based on this technology that actually exist and they actually work. So when people start Googling whether there is frequencies and that different structures resonate and whether there are machines that can utilize those frequencies to treat those disorders, Google says yes, there are examples like that. And I think the most obvious example is an MRI machine, because it uses both the resonant frequencies, it uses magnets, it uses electricity, and all of that can make it sound that it works in a very similar way to a Rife machine. In reality, this can't be further from the truth, because the way an MRI scanner works, as you can see in this diagram, it uses a magnetic field to align protons, which are basically hydrogen atoms, and they're present in water, and most of the human body is composed of water. That's why we can image most of the structures in the human body. And without the magnet, the protons spin in random directions. When you apply a magnetic field, they flip according to the direction of the field, and this uses a lot of energy. The magnet inside the MRI machine has to be supercooled by liquid hydrogen at minus 260 degrees or whatever, and when those hydrogens are aligned, that's when the radio frequency wave comes in, and this radio frequency is absorbed by the hydrogen atom, which makes it rotate into the opposite way, and this is where the concept of resonance comes in, because the radio frequency wave has to match the frequency of the proton. So as a result, this information then goes into a computer that processes it and builds an image of the body that we're trying to measure. In reality, it's a lot more complicated. It involves a lot of physics, a lot of math, and the machine itself is also very complicated and expensive. A new one can cost like $1 million, not $300. With this example, the molecules are largely unaffected. Only the spin of the proton is changed briefly. There is no change in the actual structure of anything. When you go out of the MRI machine, it's all back to normal. There is no long-term side effects because the spin of the proton doesn't really affect the structure of the cell. But all the terminology and principles seem to be very similar to the one of the Rife machine. There are of course some other examples, like there is this machine that uses sound waves that it concentrates on a very small point and destroys the tissue. Or there are ablation radiofrequency devices that focus the energy on a very small tip of this device and destroy nerve ending. And the way this works is that radiofrequency waves vibrate the tissue similarly to how a microwave works by heating up your soup. So here the radiofrequency waves heat up the nerve endings and the tissue and very precisely burn the cells and the tissue around the probe. So it's not about resonating the structures and the molecules to shatter them like a glass. It's about creating heat in a very precise point instead of inserting a hot probe that would damage all of the skin layers before the tip, before where the heat is meant to be applied. Or there are techniques to apply electricity to a cell in order to create pores in its membrane. So there are a lot of applications of the technology, and Rife and the Rife machines, I mean in the past he obviously didn't, but current people who follow his teachings, they claim that it's just the same technology, we just use it in more innovative way. And it's quite difficult for people to research this information independently and evaluate whether the Rife machine manufacturers actually found a way to use this thing in a different way, or they're just claiming that they use the technology but there's no underlying science. And from what we looked at today, I think it's quite clear that Rife was a smart researcher that built machines, but he believed in concepts that just can't be explained or reproduced even 100 years later. And Rife and his followers, and even currently the people who still do it, they claim that FDA and the government are suppressing those advancements. But the machines are freely sold on the market, anyone can buy them, you can ship them worldwide, you can test them, you can read the manual. They're not suppressed, they're not recognized by the medical community, but you're free to buy the machine, you're free to build it, there are no restrictions on it. Even on their website, which I find very interesting, they claim that those devices can be used for testing, energy balancing, and you can experiment using those frequencies on the cultures and yourself, bacterial cultures or yourself. But they also say that the devices are used for experimental work, they're not used for diagnosis, prevention, cure, treatment, or mitigation of any disease or illness in human beings. And they're not designed or intended to affect the function or structure of any human body system, right? And you can say they put this disclaimer because FDA requires them to put this disclaimer. But they mentioned that those devices are legal in Germany and South Africa, or not legal, but registered as medical instruments. So why would they still put the claim that they don't work, right? It's on the same page, and there's no mention of any exclusion for Germany and South Africa. So they even themselves say that this doesn't work, that it doesn't intend it to even affect anything. So why would you think that they are intended to affect anything? At the end of the day, I think even in 2025, it is a very relevant topic, because there are countless comments and posts on Reddit and other internet forums that claim that their relatives were helped by the machine, or that they know someone that's used the machine and it helped them, or even personal evidence that they finally figured out how the machine works. They finally purchased all of the right attachments, and at the end of the day the machine cured their UTI or a chronic illness. Which is of course great, but how can they be sure that if they took a sugar pill that wouldn't have the same effect for $1 instead of $3,500. And in my opinion, that's what those companies hope for. That you just experiment long enough and hard enough and justify all of the failings by not having the correct hardware or not understanding the software, and then at some point the issue resolves, right? Your immune system starts working, your UTI clears, and then you convince yourself that it was the machine that helped you and not your immune system that just cleared an infection naturally. So I think it's a very relevant and complicated topic, and if you made it to the end of the video, I want you to leave a comment whether you or someone you know had an experience with the Rife machine, and if you do, or if you just generally believe that the machine works, I want you to tell me which particular part of the science behind the machine or its application you think I didn't cover well enough or you would like to know more of. Or if there is some other pseudoscientific topic that you want me to look into and particular points that you want me to cover. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you enjoyed it and that you leave some comments for me to explore any topic you wish in more detail. Thank you. Bye.